Okay, great. So thank you for coming tonight, everyone. I realize there's a lot going on, and I felt like it was important to bring Andrew back to be able to answer some questions that came up at the last webinar and go a little bit deeper on some of the approaches that Marin County used. We didn't really get into the specifics about, the management of things like the by name list last time. So that's how we're going to proceed tonight. We have created quite a bit more space for your own questions and answers. And so I'm really excited that, we can just make this a chat tonight. And so anyway, just so everybody knows, and I don't know who didn't make it the last time, but one of the DBAs that I'm doing under my nonprofit 501c3 is this Homelessness Impact Project. And what we're trying to do specifically is bring the learning of innovation models to the work of homelessness. Tonight, our agenda is going to be that we go a little bit deeper on how Marin County changed the way that they approach the by name list management. And Andrew, they are working with community solutions, so I'm sure you're going to talk about that a little bit more, and maybe what you learned and what they helped you change just a little bit to be more effective. And then we're going to talk about some of the specifics around collaborations and some of the techniques to make the collaborations work a little bit better. And hi, Bill, how are you doing? And then we're going to open up for questions. And since we don't have everyone showing up on the call, we can go deeper into the QA for what you'd really like to know, which I'm really excited about. Again, just to kind of optimize your computer so the sound doesn't cut out. Occasionally, it helps to turn off your video if you start cutting out. That sometimes helps. And we will be recording the session tonight and then placing that on YouTube, in a couple days, and I'll let everybody know when that happens. So that's how our agenda is going to work. And there. And just to reiterate kind of like what I'm doing with this project is kind of focusing on these topical areas. We're calling these presentations leverage points. And I want to tell you all about 2 other presentations that are happening in December as well. They're not our presentations, but they are with people that we support and other partners. So basically, we want to talk about how, with our presentation series, which is going to go on through to next year, we're going to talk about what innovation really would look like for homeless services. And I know there's a lot of misunderstanding around innovation. We're not talking about running out necessarily and finding brand new ideas for homeless services. We're talking about how to establish a feedback loop around them so that we continually iterate toward improvement. And so that's the innovation methodology I would like to bring with some other partners next year. We're really big on data literacy, and we are going to do a series with a gentleman who is not here tonight about how to understand and plan and manage off of the HMIS data. Andrew agrees with me. Thank you. The HMIS data is a very deep dive. It's very stage-based, and so it's when somebody says we've reduced homelessness by 50%, we really need to know what that means, and the public often walks away with a different conception of that. We're going to talk about project management practices, which actually include the accountability frameworks and risk mitigation, and how well communication structures can work in innovation models. And then again, what I'm referring to about tactical HUD right here is really like, how do we better our processes, specifically meeting the guidelines that HUD affords for us. So that's kind of like the lens that we're proceeding with in 2021. And I don't see anyone on the call tonight that would be causing any issues this way, but I do just want to say that, like, chatting, especially when you're talking about like a provider that you may have concerns with the way they do business or their effectiveness, that's not really what we're hoping to bring forth here in innovation, because all innovation, and I hope Bill would agree with me, innovation really comes from the betterment of ideas that have been tried and failed, and people recognize those failures are important to the learning cycle and to the improvement cycle. So I just like innovation to be thought of as improvement all the time. And yes, there are new good ideas that come, but generally they seem to be spearheaded by things that have already been tried. So nothing is wrong. It's a whole environment that we strive to build so that these good ideas can flourish and go forward. So with that, Andrew, I think I'm ready to start, and I'm going to go to, oops, let's see. There you are. And I'm going to go ahead and shut down my screen and go ahead and let you get started with your slides and what we discussed you'd be talking about tonight.
Well, sounds great.
All right. And
let me pull mine up here. Okay. All right, well, great. Well, good evening again, everyone. My name is Andrew Henning. I've been working to end homelessness in the Bay Area for over a decade now, which is hard to believe. I have most recently, the past almost 7.5 years, been working in Marin County, where I served as the director of homeless planning and outreach with the city of San Rafael. I helped co-found a group called Opening Doors Marin, which is a public-private partnership to end chronic and veteran homelessness. And I'm also now helping to run an outreach program for Richardson's Bay Regional Agency, which I'll talk a little bit about tonight. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of caveat up front that, and I should have done this at our last presentation, but while I've done a version of this presentation with, on behalf of our providers and city and county before, tonight I'm really just kind of sharing my perspective, having worked in this field for, again, over 10 years, and specifically in a community that's had pretty significant reductions in homelessness. So with that, just as a reminder to kind of tee things up, from 2017 to 2019, our community, Marin County, California, had a 28% reduction in chronic homelessness. And for the folks that we housed, specifically who were from San Rafael, where I was working, we saw an 86% reduction in police utilization of services and a 54% reduction in EMS utilization. I was also running a report earlier with our council turning over with the recent election. From 2015 to 2019, San Rafael specifically saw a 27% overall reduction in homelessness and a 37% reduction in unsheltered homelessness. So again, this has been a trend in the right direction for a while now. For folks who are obviously more local to the Bay Area and Sonoma, Marin County, I think a lot of people ask, is there really a problem with homelessness in Marin County? Marin being obviously the affluent suburban community just north of San Francisco. There are a lot of things that are great in Marin and a great quality of life. But as I talked about during the last presentation, those factors have also contributed to, as recently as 2017, Marin having the 7th highest per capita rate of homelessness in the entire country. So that was really the environment that we were working in and trying to build momentum within. But I think what's interesting about this and thinking about tonight about how we actually did build momentum to change is the stats were not enough. And my perspective from having worked in now probably close to 10 different communities in the Bay Area over my career, it's really never the statistics that do it. It's something else that is the tipping point for change. And that could be major encampment activity or unsheltered activity. It could be unsheltered activity in the form of cars or RVs. But for us, especially in San Rafael, it was downtown San Rafael. And like any community, we have sort of our core commercial area. In San Rafael, that was 4th Street. And so like a lot of communities across the country, we began to see a lot of unsheltered activity along 4th Street, a lot of loitering, a lot of public intoxication, just a lot of quality of life issues for our community. That was starting to spill over into surrounding parks. And around, I would say starting as early as 2012, 2013, there began to be a community movement of residents and business owners who, in San Rafael, there are 2 major homeless service providers in the downtown. And the thinking was things have gotten so bad that it must be these providers that are causing these problems, even though they'd been in the community for 40 years. And so there was a movement to actually get the San Rafael City Council to revoke the use permit for one of these centers. And so that was really kind of the political climate where this all started. And so at that time, this is about the summer of 2015, I was actually working for a nonprofit that was based in San Rafael. In fact, we had basically been brought to Marin, to San Rafael, to address this issue of blight and loitering and other issues with unsheltered homelessness in San Rafael. And given the conversation being focused on these two providers, I had spent a lot of my earlier career in the South Bay, and specifically the peninsula. And I'd spent a lot of time working in a place called the Opportunity Center, which is based in Palo Alto. And the Opportunity Center is basically a drop-in homeless center. It's got showers, lockers, food, but it also has 90 units of permanent supportive housing. And so I kind of felt like this is the holy grail. If the problem is these providers, well, let's just build like the ultimate one-stop center and unite them, and it would be amazing. So I organized a group while I was still working for this nonprofit that included city leaders, including the mayor, county leaders, including county supervisors, health and human service executives, local business leaders, local service providers. And we basically caravanned down from Marin down to Palo Alto, which is about an hour drive. And we learned more about the Opportunity Center, got a tour. But what was interesting is that the provider for the Opportunity Center is an organization called Life Moves, and they're based in San Mateo. And as we're talking about our issues in San Rafael, they were like, well, we had a lot of similar issues in San Mateo in terms of chronic homelessness in our downtown. And that was really like the root issue that was driving community concerns. It wasn't the providers, it was chronic homelessness. And so for us, this was really, it wasn't so much the Opportunity Center tour, it was really learning about this chronic homeless focus. And to just briefly go into this, chronic homelessness is long-term homelessness that's exacerbated by some sort of disabling condition. So if you were to look at the cost per capita of everyone experiencing homelessness, people that experience chronic homelessness, which are a minority of the homeless community, anywhere from 10 to 25% of the homeless community overall, the per capita cost can range from $60,000 to $80,000 per year in public services. This is also where you get a lot of the community complaints about homelessness, is people that are chronically homeless. And also just ethically from a provider side, these are the most vulnerable people. And studies have shown that people that are chronically homeless pass away on average over 25 years earlier than their housed peers from treatable chronic illness. And so what was interesting is we started to learn more about chronic homelessness. And this was like circa, end of 2015, early 2016, is that our historical focus in Marin, and I think this is true across most of the country, honestly, was not on chronic homelessness. It was on this other part of the curve. And so the question is really why. And I didn't include this stat, but it's worth noting, as close as Santa Clara County, they've done some research on this, that over a 5-year period, almost 50% of people that became homeless in their community resolved their homelessness in less than 6 months. So it really is, there's this very rapid churn in people that become temporarily homeless. And then there's these people that get stuck in homelessness for, in some cases, decades. And so again, the question is why the struggle with solving chronic homelessness? And I think there are 3 reasons. Number one, as I've been talking about, and this was something that happened in Marin, is there's often this question of worthiness. And I think this stems from the fact that housing and homeless resources are inherently scarce, locally, at a state level, at a federal level. And so often, rather than being able to provide housing to everyone that needs it or needs help with, having more affordable housing, we have to ration that housing in some way as policymakers. And so oftentimes, even though the chronically homeless are driving a lot of the community concerns, oftentimes when we really get down to it, the political will is more towards housing families or youth or other subpopulations that might seem more sympathetic. And so that worthiness factor was huge to overcome when we embarked on this new effort. Second is it's hard. These folks are hard to serve, and that's part of the reason why they haven't gotten help historically. This is based on data from Marin County, but if you look at this, you can see that compare the non-chronic homeless population versus the chronically homeless population, you see a huge number of disabling conditions that could be physical health, mental health, developmental issues, traumatic brain injury, often multiple of these issues at the same time. And when you compare the reasons that people become homeless between the chronically homeless versus the regular general population, you see in some cases 100 to 200% higher occurrence of these disabilities, of drug and alcohol issues, of mental illness. So it's my kind of working hypothesis at this point that when you think about homelessness across the country, there's a lot of people that are becoming homeless for a short period of time, primarily because of economic factors. And then there are people that are becoming homeless for long periods of time, and it's more of a healthcare issue. And that stems back to, deinstitutionalization and the erosion of our mental health system. But that's really the core dynamic that's going on. And so finally, because of both the worthiness and because of the difficulty, funders, be it cities, counties, foundations, they want results and they want to help as many people as possible for as little money as possible. And that's not always possible with chronic homelessness. So I think what we observed in Marin is that these three factors were sort of colluding unintentionally, if you will, to prevent us from really focusing on chronic homelessness. So when we realized, though, that we could not ignore this and it had to be our focus, we really were like, well, how do we even go about solving this? And so we went all across the region. We even went up to Sonoma, and that was really kind of our first taste of housing first, and the ability to buy a motel or hotel and turn it into a highly successful housing first program. But really, of all the things that we learned about, HOT was still, and the San Mateo work was still the most intriguing to us. And so basically what San Mateo had done, given that they had the same chronic homeless issue in their downtown, they had formed this partnership that basically the city of San Mateo, through the police department, convened all of the local service providers and said, look, these are the 12 or 10 or 12 people who are the most visible, vulnerable people in our community. And if we cannot come together to get them housed, what are we doing? And that was the core strategic shift that led to the success down there. It wasn't just another program. HOT certainly is a program, but it's also this strategy of creating a by name list of your most vulnerable people. And so we decided, well, I guess if they did it and they've had success, why don't we try it? And so beginning in March of 2016 in Marin County, we convened this group of policymakers. The city and the county were part of it, as well as frontline staff, executive directors. And you can see it was really this coalition of people who had, again, been collaborating maybe at a policy level historically, but certainly not sitting around a table talking about 10 people and how to get them housed. And so to really break down the HOT process, what did we do? How did we do it? It was really about these four things, which we call our ABCDs of accountability or change. So in terms of accountability, we met bi-weekly and the group committed to regular attendance. We took actions, we assigned actions, and we reviewed those actions at every meeting. So that was the project management piece was very key. And in terms of outcomes, it was really simple. It was about, are we working with the most vulnerable people? Are we getting them housed, and are they staying housed? Those are the only metrics that mattered. And by having this by name list, it really forced us to focus on this group of vulnerable people and also look at the ways that systems were failing them. And so by having both frontline case management as well as agency leadership, we were able to in real time say, hey, I work for X organization, and program Y at your organization has created this barrier. That's why Bob is not making his housing appointments, is this barrier. And we could in real time address those issues. And because obviously we're collaborating on such a close level, it led to us introducing a new release of information in our community that allowed for basically an unprecedented level of case conferencing and coordination. And that then spilled over into our HMIS data system. And the result over those first 18 months is that we housed 23 of the most, again, visible, vulnerable, and frankly, disruptive people in downtown San Rafael. And that was our hypothesis, is we think that this approach can actually end chronic homelessness. This is our pilot. And so we really use this pilot effort over 18 months to then galvanize everything that came next. And what came next, I wanted to pause here actually too, because there are what I'm calling X factors, but there's some other things that I think were happening in the background too. It wasn't just HOT, but I don't want to gloss over it and say it was only hot. But a couple things were, one, there was a lot of new staff involved with this, not entirely new, but there were new people. So the city of San Rafael had created this director level position to address homelessness. We also had a relatively new city manager. There was new leadership at our local St. Vincent de Paul Society. There was new staff at the county and HHS. And so in addition to the new staff, there began to be regular meetings among city and county staff, city and county electeds. And I can tell you from being in those meetings were not always, kumbaya. I mean, there were some really difficult meetings. Some meetings we had staff walk out of the meetings. So, but it was really that just, early effort to build relationships. In terms of building the buy-in, I think we really saw government as being the convener. So, I was working for the city. The city of San Rafael had the most problems with unsheltered homelessness. And so we could really bring the partners together using that sort of official authority of government. But then within the providers, interestingly, there were early adopters who saw HOT and saw, the chronic homeless problem space and were like, absolutely, let's do this. And then there were others who, were a little bit less excited about it. And so it was this balance of, all of us basically working pro bono to do this program, and then also having patience for the fact that some providers weren't there yet, and we needed to bring them along more slowly. And then there's some other tactical stuff which I can answer in the Q&A. But basically, in terms of the housing for HOT, because this was a question that came up, is, how did you actually house those 18 people? And in the beginning, frankly, it was a lot of begging and a lot of favors. And so the way HOT was set up is that, within that meeting, there were service providers that weren't housing providers. And so a lot of times it was really, truly just like colleagues being like, can you please accept this person into your program? And then the county at that point, like, we didn't have any, housing first principles embedded in our contracts or anything like that. But it was, again, the county using some of their formal authority to say, hey, like, can you really please, like, let's just try to house this one person and see what happens. At that time, and still actually to this day, there's about 20 permanent supportive housing units that become available every year just through turnover. And so we started trying to claim some of those units. In terms of our Section 8 vouchers, there's also about 70 Section 8 vouchers that turn over every year in Marin. We try to claim some of those. So that's how we began to like get some of those early placements. And interestingly, again, I don't know how we convinced them in hindsight, but we were hosting our meetings at the housing authority. So that's where we were going to actually do the HOT meeting. And ultimately, when we had to roll out coordinated entry, which every community has to have a coordinated entry system, which is basically just, a common front door for accessing services and assessing people for services. Ultimately, we were able to convince the housing authority to become our coordinated entry provider, because in a way they were the most neutral, because they didn't really have a dog in the fight in terms of, direct services. They were more providing the housing and assessment. And so that was a huge coup to get them really involved and invested in what we were doing. So moving into 2017, and really 2017 to today, there are 4 things that I think have been really key to our success. And then I'll open it up to Q&A. The first is that we doubled down on our strategy. So on October 1st of 2017, we officially launched coordinated entry in Marin County. So HOT was pre-coordinated entry. But we learned through an organization called Community Solutions, which is a national group, they had this campaign called Built for Zero, where basically they were trying to embed this by name list principle in coordinated entry itself. And so the idea there is that it's moving beyond simply, checking the boxes with HUD that, yes, we have coordinated entry, and instead organizing the whole system around creating a by name list of everyone that's chronically homeless and every homeless veteran that's in your community, and making that your target focus. So we joined Built for Zero. That was like early 2018. And just got a lot of like really helpful TA from them. But again, I think more than that, and this again was sort of just happenstance, we ended up, they have conferences that are across the country. And so we had all of the essentially deputy directors from our organizations attend the conferences. And I think, like, I don't know if it's just the nature of those roles are more operational, but it really allowed us to become, friends in a way. Like, we were always colleagues, but like it really allowed us to build deeper relationships. And I really cannot understate, and I think you saw it earlier with like the visit to Palo Alto, how important these relationship building opportunities are to just get out of the community, get out of, the standard 1 hour meeting where you maybe talk to each other for 5 minutes before or after, but like really like get to know each other and understand how each other operates. That was a huge advantage of this process for us. And of course, then learning from 80 other communities around the country that are doing this. The second thing that we did was then really synergize scarce resources. So as I said, throughout this presentation, whether it be housing vouchers or existing permanent supportive housing or even just money for services, all of that stuff is scarce. And so what we've done is basically created this three-legged stool, if you will, that is the buy name list strategy, the services, and then the housing. And so I'll describe that in more detail. So the first is the services. So again, I think what I've noticed is that, Marin County being a more affluent county, a lot of people assume, oh, well, the community foundation or, local individuals have just contributed money to this effort and that's why it's been successful. But in reality, we've just really repurposed existing resources that have already been there and are there for a lot of communities already. So whole person care is a state of California Medi-Cal, Medicare, Medicaid innovation program that's designed to help reduce healthcare utilization. And so a lot of communities used whole person care in a lot of different ways, but we used whole person care to fund housing first level services, as well as fund assertive community treatment, which is another best practice for supporting people with mental illness and housing. And when we did that, we kind of shifted our coordinated entry to also then have a more of a focus on healthcare utilization as criteria for our number one placements. The next thing that happened was at that time, again, this is like 2016, 2017, we had really bad housing voucher utilization with our Section 8 vouchers and our other voucher programs. I think it was like 50% utilization of people that got vouchers. So at that time, the county of Marin, for a nominal amount of money, put in some funding to Marin Housing Authority to increase those utilization rates. And so that looked like hiring professional real estate staff to help recruit landlords, increasing security deposits, a little bit of a marketing campaign, as well as a 24/7 assistance line. And so that allowed us to begin to have more capacity to recruit landlords. And then it all just kind of like came together perfectly in that the county had supported the landlord partnership program. So the county wanted that to be successful. We used the whole person care dollars to get more services coming in. And one of the best ways to, frankly, get landlords is to guarantee that those people that are getting housed are coming with services. And so we now had that with whole person care. So we basically had these things coming together at the same time. And over the ensuing years, our utilization rate on vouchers, I think, is now close to 90%, even though we are prioritizing the hardest to serve, most vulnerable, chronically homeless people. And that's because, again, we have the services, and the services, the data shows since the 1990s that housing first really works for people. The other thing that I think is unique about what we've done, and I have not seen in a lot of places, is that by using vouchers, and I should say here, the Housing Authority literally committed, places on our spots in the Section 8 wait list to people coming from our coordinated entry system. But because we had the vouchers, I think a lot of communities are waiting to build permanent supportive housing based on, capital funding or other funding streams to actually build new housing. And that's super important and needs to happen. But if you have vouchers, you can immediately house people in the community. And so that's what we did, is basically from 2017 to 2019, we increased our permanent supportive housing stock by over 30%. And that was because we used vouchers plus these new services to create these new scattered site permanent supportive housing units. So I think that was really impactful. The two final things, just briefly. One is, I've mentioned throughout this that it was really throughout the whole process, it was about bringing county officials, city officials, business officials, nonprofit leaders, philanthropy, foundation leaders, all of them, keeping them involved in the learning process. And so at the beginning of 2019, we formally incorporated as a 501c3 this effort, this ad hoc effort that had been existing for probably 2 years prior, but we're calling it Opening Doors Marin. And so Opening Doors Marin, and this is one of the projects that I'm now working with, is really working to create the housing necessary to end chronic and veteran homelessness in Marin County. So last year we spent a lot of time looking at the feasibility of a public revenue measure, so like a bond measure, to create more affordable housing. And then this year, Opening Doors Marin actually helped project manage Marin County's Project Home Key effort, which was, again, state funding to acquire hotels, motels, or other housing. But again, I think if we hadn't had this broader partnership already meeting, there's no way we would have been able to acquire 2 of the 3 projects that we've now acquired in Marin and added another 63 units of permanent supportive housing within 4 months. And here's a picture of 2 of them. And then lastly, I was thinking, again, going back to the X factor issue, but there's this final thing that I think has been really key, is that ever since we originally committed to ending chronic homelessness, or really making this our problem space, we have been laser focused on housing people and ending chronic homelessness. And this was a editorial that came out, I forgot when it came out, it looks like 2018 maybe, but there was this kind of conflict at one point between, we had a winter shelter program that had been, an institution in Marin County for 10 years. And then rather than trying to make that permanent, a lot of the policymakers were advocating for, let's just do more around housing first. Like, that's actually working. And the reality was that over half of the people that have been cycling through this winter shelter program were ultimately housed through our coordinated entry system. And so again, to this day, there's still requests for safe parking programs, for, tough shed sites, things that are popping up all across the country. And we've just, been kind of resolute in saying no. And the reason is that I really think there's an opportunity cost to pursuing that stuff, whether you're pursuing permanent housing or more emergency interventions. Again, there's a scarcity in this space. And so if you're diverting your attention to work on that stuff, you're not focused on the real goal, which is permanent housing. And ultimately, the resolution that we found was we were able to take a lot of those, like that volunteer support and community interest, and move that into our existing shelter system to allow our existing shelter system to have more capacity to support the most difficult people, or the most vulnerable people who needed help but weren't getting into our shelter system. So that was ultimately a better outcome, is that our most vulnerable people were able to access a system that they had had a harder time accessing historically. Because of our success, because of our commitment to housing, we were able to leverage new funding at a national level through our involvement with Build for Zero. Over the last 3 years, we've housed now over 300 chronically homeless people. We have a fully built out by name list, which helps us with our data and our milestones. So again, really, I think we've just had this focus that has allowed us to continue to just have more and more progress with this effort. So that is my best effort to break down tactically how this change process has unfolded. And so with that, I will stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions.
Andrew, I gotta say, that was like that. I usually try to take notes as I go along, like with some of the things I want to follow up with, and I have 8. So we're going to open it up to people who are on the call. And what it would be great to do is if you would just chat in that you'd like to ask your questions, so we're not bumping into each other speaking. That was fabulous. And just a lot of good deep dive kind of process information as well. So who would like to start with their question or observation?
Teddy, can we just speak, or would you prefer that we type them?
On Oh, you don't need to type the question, Jules, but if you want to ask one, just put your name in there. So let's start with you because you jumped in there first.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Andrew, thank you. And I have been so grateful to Teddy for bringing you to us both last time and this time. And I guess also I'm the director of programs at COTS in Petaluma. So I think that you and everyone else here at both of your presentations will notice that our county leaders have not attended these meetings. And I'm really curious what our first steps would be to get our county interested in what Teddy and you are putting out here. I mean, it's like you're in Marin County, you're miles away, but it feels like you're like galaxies away from where we're at in our county. So any little tidbits of ideas of how we'd get leadership to buy into this approach? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, it's hard to say kind of, how the sort of stars aligned in the beginning, but I will say that I really, and again, to whatever extent this had an impact, I don't know, but I really think that trip to Palo Alto back in the summer of 2015 was a key turning point for us. And it was something that at the time, again, it was like, I wasn't even working for the city. I was just like, I think this could be a great idea. And it was a matter of, just organizing the event and trying to convince all these people, like, just spend a half day. Let's drive down there together. We'll have lunch, like we'll cater lunch, and we'll have all these experts come and just talk about what we've done. And I think what was the most interesting part of that was the conversations to and from. And so, because we kind of intermingled, like it wasn't just the county people going down together. It was a county person, a city person, a provider. And so I think it was like that chance to have kind of like a free flow debrief that really made a huge difference. The other thing I will tell you, because it is specific to Sonoma, is that we went up and saw the Palms Inn, and we went up and saw the I think it was the crisis intervention unit, the new unit, the CSU unit up there, and then I think we also saw a youth program, maybe it was like social advocates for youth. I can't remember exactly, but so anyway, we went up and saw all these like cool programs. We talked to like local leaders in Sonoma, and we were coming back, and like the same dynamic was happening. People were like debriefing in the car, and then we had the parking lot debrief when we got back. And what struck me is that, even though Housing First and a lot of these programs and stuff, like they're not new, and like we have all the data to show that they're effective, I think it's okay to say that it really wasn't meant in like, I think a mean way or condescending way, but what I noticed was a lot of our policymakers felt it was almost like competitive. Like they went up there and saw that like what your supervisors and what your nonprofits had done, and they're like, well, God, like if they did it, why can't we do it? And it was literally that competitiveness that I think spurred a desire to do things differently. And so that to me, like just kind of cracked me up. Like after all these reports and fact finding and, all this kind of stuff, it was this like competitive human nature to like one up another community that like really like got things going. So to whatever extent like that's can be replicated, I just think that like physical going somewhere, like building relationships, having lunch, like it's like the soft stuff that's, I don't know. I think it was like some of the most important stuff in the end.
Andrew, I've taken Susan Gorin and Barbie Robinson and Tina, I can't remember her last name right now. She works for the county, down to Homeward Bound to tour all of their programs, very similar to what you're saying. And they were very enthusiastic, we want to do this up in Sonoma, and nothing happened. Nothing happened from that. We went to Oma Village, went to the senior center. Mary Kay and Paul went over all the programs, our capital, program for ending veteran homelessness in Marin County. It was very enthusiastic, a lot of exchange of information. Barbie said, I want to have more meetings. It happened. And so I feel like Jules does, how do we do this without getting the county reps here? They're not here at this meeting now. We can't do it in a vacuum.
Yeah. Well, I would say like the kind of phase two. So again, it's like, I think that like those just going and getting people excited was the first step, but then you have to actually like I don't know, replicate some of the excitement in a way. And so I think the next thing that we did was, and again, I think all of our providers like kind of reacted differently to it. Some of them were like, oh, we're already doing that. Or some of them were like, this wouldn't work here. But some of them were like, this is awesome. Like this by name list approach, like this seems like really creative. And so I think like what also began to happen like after that trip, because it was probably like 6 months after that like we started talking about like, well, why don't we actually do the HOT program? Like we should do that. And so when we first started that, you know, it was very like people came hemming and hawing. And I think what was interesting at that time was like the city of San Rafael and the county of Marin were like not on the same page. And it was very much the city being like, this is a social service problem. County, you need to step up. And the county being like, we're doing a lot already. Leave us alone. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You're overreacting. I mean, it was like not good. Like, and it sounds like that might be, you know, a similar type of thing. But I think what started happening was like once we the city started officially convening and working off this by name list, and we'd invite county staff to like, hey, like, you know, make it like very real. Like, why is Bob homeless? Like he's been homeless in San Rafael for 30 years. Like this is unacceptable. And so it was that personalizing it that made it so key. And I think the other thing, like through my role with the city, was like my title at the time was Director of Homeless Planning and Outreach, but outreach wasn't like street outreach, it was public outreach. And so I think we really like made this bet, you know, that chronic homelessness is the focus. That's why there are all these problems in downtown. That's why people are so frustrated. It's chronic homelessness. It's chronic homelessness. And so it was like that kind of like messaging and that like hypothesis that really helped, I think, spur action. Jerry, I think maybe you had a question.
Yeah, Jerry.
Andrew, I have a lot of statements to say. The first statement I would say is I think we should turn this over to Petaluma and Runner Park and Grace and let them work on this. You know, Jenna and Jules and Grace, you are the people in the middle of all of this. You know, I came late to this meeting because I went to the county had a online meeting about the Sora Hotel, you know, at the intersection of College and Mendocino and downtown Santa Rosa. Listening to you the first time and missing you the second time, I am absolutely certain Sonoma County, that's everything you're talking about, every single piece that you're talking about. It is just that we have to take advantage of this opportunity of disruption that we're in the middle of. We've, with the revitalization of the continuum of care, we just have to take control of it. We just have to tell them, the people on this call and everybody else who's going to be on that board, we need to fix this stuff. You know, we don't have, I cannot think of any other community that has all of the resources and all of the like really, really good experienced people that we have. If each of you, think about everybody that you know in our system, we've all moved around. We've all, I think of Emily Quigg, I think of Michael Dowse, I think of all the people who moved through Catholic Charities and who moved through POTS. We all know each other. We all know the relationships of what we have and what we should fix. Let's just fix this damn thing. To tell the city leaders and the county leaders, get out of the way or help us. And it's all about relationships. I know everybody on this call, and I know everybody, I'm trying to build up Barbie and Tina and the people at that level. I'm having conversations with Angela. These are conversations. Just challenge each other to fix this. What the problem is, really right now, is safe parking in tiny home villages. We have no interim between the space of $500,000 apartment units and people living in doorways. We don't have that. We need to fix that. The other piece of it that I really, especially seeing who's on this call, I want to highlight you to. Have any of you heard about the Occidental Hotel proposal?
No.
No. So basically, so they have the Azura, they have the Sebastopol Inn that they now have the money for. There's some other pending thing about in Occidental where they have a hotel where they could house 18 women or some amorphous sort of definition that they're not telling any of you about, that none of us know about. So ask those questions. And the people to ask are the people at the head of behavioral health. So Barbie Robinson, Tina Rivera, Will Gayoski in particular, so and Bill Carter. So Barbie's going to put Bill Carter on the board of continuum of care. It's an inherent conflict of interest because Barbie is Bill's supervisor. So that's a whole nother thing. But pardon my French, but fuck it. It doesn't matter, because we actually have the opportunity to say, okay, fine. We all know this shit. Let's do what we need to do. The stuff that Roanoke Park and Petaluma in particular are doing makes a tremendous amount of sense. So all we have to do is if Ernesto Oliveira says, wow, let's do it, then we finally have come 100% full circle. Because people at the city of Santa Rosa didn't, they just resisted. So what? Let's be honest, we have put a tremendous amount of money and resources and smart people into this. Then why aren't we fixing it? Just keep having that conversation, saying what can I do, where I am with what I'm doing, and then also the piece that I just said about communication is tell us what's going on. Tell us about Occidental Hotel, tell us about Sebastopol, tell us about what you want us to do, because there's like really specific research from 2016 that says the people of Sonoma County genuinely understand the homeless problem. They know what's going on. So let them be part of this. And if Sonoma County cannot fix it, I don't know what. There's no hope. We have all of the resources. We have all of the stuff. The only thing we have is expensive land. But we have land. We have school property. We have public property. We have the community center or the Glen Ellen Center. We have all of these things. And Andrew, I really appreciate your being the pro from Dover, because that's what we need. We need somebody coming in and saying, oh, what about this? What about this? This is what we did. But literally looking at the people on this call, we already have it. And there's like 30 more people just like us who already have it. So anyway,
Marion, can I stop just a second and say that Bill had a question that he posed privately? So can we jump to Bill first and then we'll come back into the general discussion?
Yeah, so Andrew, I think the thing that's really inspiring is how you take existing ingredients that aren't solving the problem by themselves, the whole person care dollars, the vouchers, and being two in particular. And either one of those, you could have a voucher being used, but it failing because the person didn't get the care, or the whole person care could fail because they didn't have housing for the person. So bringing those together where each program becomes more successful, I think is really important. Can you share a little bit more about how things you did to leverage the whole person care dollars? Because those are available across California, but you did something different to combine those with the voucher and create greater success. Can you share a little bit more about what you had to do to bring those together?
And if I may first, I am working for whole person care.
Yeah, so on that front, it was interesting because like thinking back, I think it must have been maybe, it was shortly after we joined Build for Zero. And so I'm trying to think about like the conferences, because there was one kickoff one was in Los Angeles. Then there was one in Denver, I think was the next one. So it's like maybe the summer of 2018. And so, or no, it must've been 2017 because it was before we kicked off coordinated entry and stuff. So regardless, we had, we're moving in this direction of like, okay, like HOT was a success. We want to scale up coordinated entry to like include the by name list methodology. We're learning from Community Solutions how you do that. And like I said, the most interesting thing about a lot of those conferences is that we spent probably maybe 10% of the time in the workshops. And the other 90% was like debating local programming and policy. And so while we were at that conference, the Whole Person Care RFP came out, and we collectively spent probably 6 hours talking about how not to use it, how to use it, how to accelerate what we were doing, how it could derail it. And so it was just really this, like, I think, key turning point of how we collectively, it was interesting because when we went to Sonoma, I think our initial impression was there seems to be like one major provider, and wow, how great would that be if you just had one provider and you could work with them to do whatever you need to do. Whereas we had multiple. And I think what we began to realize through Whole Person Care, because Whole Person Care could fund outreach, it could fund case management, it could fund other things. We kind of like finally started settling into the fact that each of us had a niche. So one group was doing outreach really well. One group was doing housing first services really well. Another group could scale up the assertive community treatment model, but all of it needed funding. And so I think at that time, Whole Person Care was also just like more general. It was like, we're just trying to reduce healthcare utilization. And so ultimately we felt like if we submitted a collective application and applied and said, we're all going to do each piece, and like Whole Person Care can help in these different ways, that would make us more competitive. And so I think that's actually what happened was we, through that kind of Built for Zero team, in a way created the Whole Person Care policy for the county. And then everything that came later, like we really roped it into coordinated entry, where I know a lot of communities did not do that. And I think that was because we were beginning to be more organized as that kind of like steering group to say, we need more services for housing. How are we going to fund this? Because there's no funding for it. And so again, it was like, what kind of came first? I mean, I think it was like really that team and forming that team,
Right.
and having, again, the by nameless strategy.
Yeah, that's great. I think I refer to that as strategy driven funding rather than, oh, we're going to chase this grant. Oh, we're going to chase that grant. You guys had a strategy to work as a team. So when the funding became available, you were able to really leverage that and then do what you were hoping to do.
Yeah. And part of that like 6 hour marathon conversation was this like we were still, I guess we were like 1 foot in being the team, 1 foot being our individual agencies. So it was like, we'd have an idea for the collective proposal, then it would kind of like fall apart, and then there'd be like debate, and then we'd come back together and like, okay, no, we can actually do this. And so you're right. I mean, that's totally a great description.
Jenna had a question, and so can we, oh, I'm sorry. And then Marin, I promise you, we will get back. We'll circle back around again. Jenna, are you muted?
I'm unmuted now.
Yay.
Yeah.
Good to see
First
you.
of all, I wanted to let you know, Andrew, that the last event that you had a month ago, I put it out to the Roanoke Park Homelessness Roundtable, which is a community collaborative that the city facilitates. Started a little over a year ago. Marin is a regular participant at that. I put it out to that whole listserv. I put it out to our homeless task force that addresses encampments. And I was surprised to see we had a pretty good turnout at the last meeting. There were a number of folks from Roundtable. We had our deputy chief from public safety on it. We had one of our code compliance officers on it, and really positive feedback from everybody. And as a result of it, at the last homelessness roundtable meeting, at the end of the meeting, we did some brainstorming, and I asked, because it's really a meeting for the, to leverage the fire of the community, realizing that we, the city, especially, being not the largest city in the county, are not going to solve homelessness on our own. So what can we do to leverage the community, the volunteer power, et cetera? And there are some very vocal voices. I forget, were you at that one, Marin?
Yes.
That part, yeah.
Oh, no, I was at this last meeting, not yours, no.
Oh yeah, no. So this will be news to you too. But at the end of the meeting, there were a couple folks who had been at that event, and we're like, we need to do that in Roanoke Park. What will it take? Chronic homelessness is the real problem. And I'm just like, wow, this is great. I mean, how we do it as one city, because, as folks have, I already sort of highlighted, there's a lot of political dynamics that make it a little challenging to collaborate on a broader scale. And of course, we know folks move around within the county, but, I think from my perspective, it's like, what can we do within the bubble that we have? What can we do within the collaborations that we have? So the next meeting that we have, which is this upcoming Monday, that is true, Jerry. Yeah. Or you could say we get split between two, one that's Petaluma, one that's Santa Rosa. But yes, Roanoke Park gets split in half with supervisors. One that's South Santa Rosa and North Roanoke Park, and
Make them work for you.
what's that? Yes.
3% right there.
But at the upcoming Monday meeting, what folks want to do is they want to talk about chronic homelessness. So, I'm going to talk about it a little bit, probably give, a little bit of a primer for folks that aren't as familiar. And then we've also got small groups that are focused on different kind of bite-sized pieces. Again, more up from a volunteer perspective, they're going to be bringing back. But I just thought, I would pass that along. I've got quite a list of questions. So my first question for you is, can I call you offline?
Yeah.
That's my other question. Great. Because I want to make sure I ask questions that'll be relevant to the whole group and anybody watching the recording afterwards. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm putting it in my phone right now and I'll bug you later. But I think probably the big one that I'm curious about, that I'm guessing other folks on the call probably are too, is the by name list. And so I wanted to, hear a little bit more about it, the technical aspects, how you did it. I know you incorporated with coordinated entry. But yeah, any learnings from that we can take away? Yeah,
for sure. And maybe even like as a more recent example. So, and actually Karen, who's on the call, can speak to this too. So like I said, this effort started in San Rafael in 2016, and then it morphed into coordinated entry. But San Rafael is not the only place in Marin County that has challenges with homelessness. And so another kind of hotspot area is in southern Marin on the water, actually near Sausalito, so Richardson's Bay. And so there's a lot of stuff going on now around like the enforcement of boats on the water and stuff. That aside, about a little over a year ago, and that sort of like sparked me going part-time with the city, is I started working with RBRA, Richardson's Bay Regional Agency, as a contractor, to basically say like, hey, like if we're going to get more people housed off of the water who are living in these unsafe, boat situations, we need to know who they are and we need to get them assessed and enrolled in this system. And so over a period of it probably took like 3 or 4 months. I led the team, but like convened all the local service providers that were working down there, Richardson's Bay Regional Agency itself, which is the harbor master, and the local police departments. And we developed this by name list of literally, these are the, 115, 120 people that are living on the water. So it was literally like a Google Drive sheet of like, these are the people that we think are out there. And then based on that, again, subjectively, because at that point, like we didn't know who objectively was the most vulnerable. And our system has shifted from subjectively, I can't like go be like, I think Bob is our most vulnerable person, so he should go to the top of coordinated entry. There's a whole assessment process that determines who's at the top. But we could at least say like, of this group of people, we think these 20 people are the most vulnerable. So let's start with them. And so that's what we did. So we focused on trying to get them assessed and enrolled. And ultimately the challenge has been that people down there are very vulnerable, but there are people that are on land in other parts of the county that are even more vulnerable. And so that's been a whole issue of like, how do we prioritize people in that situation? But anyway, we did the same thing. We met every 2 weeks. We looked at our entire list, and then we really focused on this like subgroup of about 15 people. And between meetings, we were, again, Streets team, Karen, we're a huge partner in actually going out in the water, doing the assessments, doing the engagement. Actually, now that we're farther along in the process, we have a path to housing identified for about a dozen people. And so one of those individuals, actually, unfortunately, very sad, their partner, something happened on the water, passed away. They're actually now in Sonoma, but because of our by name list and our commitment to housing them, the streets team is working with them to, again, house them in Marin. And so I think that's like incredible that like, we're not just like, you know, that happened and she left. And so, okay, our hands are whatever, like we're really committed to, we worked really hard to get this person, you know, lined up for a housing voucher. And that's what we're going to try to do. And so that's kind of like how it started in San Rafael as well. It was like, let's get all these partners together that have direct contact with the homeless community. Let's make a by name list of the most visible, vulnerable. And then of that, like really drill down, like who are the 10, and then talk about those 10 on a bi-weekly basis. And really from a project management perspective, you know, assigning an action item to every partner that's in the room to say, okay, you've worked with Bob, like what's Bob's history? Come back next week and talk about it. And then holding that person accountable to coming back and talking about Bob's history. And what we found is like just the social pressure of people not coming back with their actions completed, holding them accountable, and just like a basic project management framework. That was a huge part in building momentum for change.
Can I ask one follow-up question to that? Assessment. So, you know, one of the challenges we run into with folks that are, you know, the most vulnerable, chronically homeless individuals, you know, can be a fear of engaging with a system, of signing releases of information and so on. And some of these releases are pages long, you know, and might be scary to any of us. So, you know, were there other components that you brought in other than just doing, you know, like the VI SPDAT or whatever version, you know, you guys chose to adopt? Were there other data points like public safety touches and, you know, medical touches, et cetera?
Yeah, so we've designed it. So it's a good point. So like in the beginning, we had just, again, like in the very beginning, this subjective list of these are the, you know, 12 to 18, or by the end, I think probably 24 people that we think are the most vulnerable in San Rafael. And it was also like, when it's still that early, we had a little leeway, I think, politically to be like, this person might not be the most literally physically vulnerable, but they're causing a huge issue. And so if we can help them, that would be a huge community win to get that early support. But then obviously like that's a biased system, so that couldn't continue. So we implemented, and a lot of communities have implemented, the VI SPDAT, which is a vulnerability assessment. And over time, we've kind of like, you know, shifted how that prioritization works on the back end. But part of it, by being part of community solutions built for Zero, is that exactly this issue you described, there were a lot of people who were resistant to doing it. And so two things have happened. One, fortunately, the more people that have done it and have gotten housed, it actually does communicate to other long-term people like, oh, this actually works. So in the beginning, it can be very slow, but over time, like, again, we were housing one person per month. Now we're housing, you know, 6+. Some months we've housed 20 people in a month. So it just takes time to build that momentum. The second thing, though, is that there are some people who are literally, because of their, you know, mental illness or their mental health or whatever it might be, they don't even recognize that they're sick. And that's like, that makes them even more vulnerable in our view. So it's like, there was a person that was downtown in San Rafael who was so mentally ill that, you know, even though he sat in the same place on a busy street for 6 months, rain or shine, like he did not think he was sick. And so we didn't know, like, how, if we can't do an assessment, how do we help this person? And so ultimately we learned from other communities. I think Chicago was ultimately the community that helped the most, but we basically created this criteria that we call our decliner process. And so if someone declines a certain number of times for services, and to your point, we can corroborate that they actually are very vulnerable based on EMS contacts or other sort of like, you know, maybe medical engagements or whatever it might be, then they can kind of bypass the typical process. It's rare. We try really hard not to do it because we don't want to create like a big loophole. But it really is like been this interesting innovation to help that population.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Those were great questions, Jenna. And I liked the answers. Those were great. Grace had a question.
I've been thinking about how to phrase this question. I believe I'm the only person in this group who is not working in the field. I'm a concerned citizen, even though I have been volunteering for homeless action. So you're talking the details is sort of overwhelming me a little bit. But however, I have been following the concept expounded by Bill about the system thinking. And that is actually what I have been doing in the last, well, all the way back to January of this year, is trying to understand what are the bits and pieces around homelessness, and from a outsider point of view. And that is also why I spent so much time in building the website, homelessaction.net. And that is spelling out all the little bits and pieces and who's doing what, and getting people following up. So what I can see is, what is very interesting to me, Andrew, is that you are an employee of a city, not the county, and that you are in charge of communication to the public, not communication within the community. And somehow you manage to maneuver yourself into it. And that brings me to the other, really the question of going to us, the question is that I see the importance of relationship, the coordination between the bits and pieces, and the communication between them, their ability to let other people know what's going on. That is the transparency. But the key is really the leadership. I wonder, in Sonoma County, which has many other cities that are having their own homelessness problem, and also I doubt if we can expect the Sonoma County staff to take this up, the leadership. I'm afraid they are very bureaucratic, which I understand is the nature of in working as the staff of a government body. And I just don't see how you can get in and get people around. And another thing is that all the agencies, homeless service providers, they depend a lot on the funding from the city and the county. Then they're not going to reveal other things or even criticize each other and the county in any way. And so that transparency, the ability, the willingness to cooperate, I really don't know how you can do the first step. So that's my very big question for you, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like it's sort of like the like the core kind of like leadership and communication about what's happening. I would say, I mean, yeah, some of it really does. Like I said, just like I think it kind of does depend who the leader is, and then kind of what their capabilities are. You know, I don't want to sugarcoat that like it can just organically happen. Like I think it takes like a certain types of people to drive it. What I will say for San Rafael's perspective was that, so in the fall, or like the fall winter of 2015, the city was basically like, we've had enough with homelessness in San Rafael. We need to do something. So, and the mayor at the time felt like, we don't want to just like create like a coordinator position. Like we want this position to carry some weight. So they created this director position. And the director position basically, you know, is on par with the police chief, the fire chief, like all those like senior people. Because I think a lot of communities, like they'll have this homeless position, but it's like buried in somewhere deep in the organization. It's sort of comparable, I would say, to like San Francisco creating a department of homelessness. Like it just elevates it to be like that much more important. And so I had zero intention of like working in government. I was working for the streets team, and I was getting my MBA, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do like social entrepreneurship. Like that's why I'm getting my MBA. Like I want to start a clean energy company for people that are experiencing homelessness. Like that was my dream. And, but then the city created this role, and I was like, oh, well, like, it just felt like there was this like unresolved business in Marin. I was like, I just don't feel ready to leave. And so my wife like talked me into it. She's like, just do it. And so I did. and so like part of it probably was like bringing like that the streets team, just like culture of like by any means necessary to like help people. And but what was interesting is like I think from the beginning it was like very much like we need to like start winning the PR argument here. And at that time there was a person who had created a daily email list that went out to about somewhere between 500 and 1,000 local residents. That was basically like he owned the conversation. Like whatever he said, people believed about homelessness. Like, and it was not good. It was like homeless people are urban terrorists. Like that was the group that was like calling for that nonprofit to get kicked out of San Rafael. Like that person was owning the dialogue. And so the city felt like we really need to like put out a formal statement about what's going on. And fortunately, like I can like piece it together in hindsight, but like there was enough flexibility that like as we started to do the hot stuff, like, and you can see all the newsletters. If you go to cityofsanrafael.org/homeless, you can see every newsletter that we've ever put out about this issue. And you can see like there's this evolution, because I wrote all of them, like around really educating the public about what chronic homelessness was, why were we focused on it, what is housing first, what is built for zero, like what are all these things. And so we brought people along, and like the feedback about the newsletters was like good. Like it wasn't a lot of jargon. There were pictures, like it was easy to understand. And so that newsletter became a counterpoint to the sort of like whatever misinformation was happening in the community. And so I think that was honestly like a big, big part of it. And then the other thing, like I said, is, you know, I'm trying to think of like how to describe it. Like, I think the city just like creating that role. And again, I don't know if it was like, again, it's weird to say, like, I don't know if it was me or just like having the role. I think it was like having the role, because previously the city like had buried homelessness as like a quarter of the economic development director's job. And so there was just no focus on that at all. And so I think just having someone that could like go meet the nonprofits in a way where it wasn't like the city council blaming them for all of the city's problems, like, but actually like open a dialogue with the county. Like it just took time. And then again, like, because I started this before I even worked for the city, was like, I just personally had this belief of like, let's just get all these random people together and educate them. And then like, eventually they'll come around, and that's kind of what happened. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there is a way to leverage PR and the communications to like really win the argument. And I think people, even if they're frustrated with the city or the county, the city and county still have a formal authority position to like put out a statement of like, this is what's happening. And I think a lot of people, you know, trust that and, you know, can get on board with whatever the new strategy is.
I want to mention this. It probably would make more sense to my two colleagues living in Sonoma County, is that Homeless Action had been really working to galvanize the concerned citizens and maybe some professionals in to have a dialogue around this issue. But recently we have members who want to expand this conversation to the public. So what you're saying makes sense to us. And also in Sonoma County, we do have a group called CAN, and it stands for Citizen for Action Now. And they are dead against homelessness or any help to them. So I think it is about time we need to have a conversation, because we all want the same thing. We want the people off the street and live, you know, a healthy life. And the situation in the city, the economic situation would improve without homelessness everywhere. So anyway, that sounds like a possible role for Homeless Action to do, to sort of communicate with the public a little bit more, rather than getting together every Monday and chit chat and get frustrated.
I think the other thing I would add to that too is my sense in the beginning was, because, and this was really from like my time with the streets team is, we had this philosophy with the Marin team. I don't know if Karen, if it's still there, but like, I really tried to like, preach this like radical empathy concept around, we need to have radical empathy for our team members in the sense of like really meet them where they are. But we also need to have radical empathy for community members and their frustration. And I think a lot of times like government and providers to some extent can get in like a little bit of a defensive place. And again, I totally get it. I was there. But it can create this like friction. And what I came to learn, and again, this was like part of my own education as like an advocate, was that there were legitimate concerns from the business community. Like I think before I worked for the city, I had this kind of mindset of like, oh, like any business that's mad about homeless people, screw them. Like they don't have a heart. But like, and there was one person that like, I mean, this really kind of changed me. Was there was a guy who owned a business in downtown San Rafael. He'd been a science teacher. He poured his entire life savings into this business. He worked 6 days a week, barely had time for his family. And he was dealing with someone defecating in front of his store every day. And so like, when I came to like understand, like there's a legitimate frustration from residents or business community members, like something's got to change. And that's really where the chronic homeless piece came in, because the conversation I would have with even the most anti, NIMBY person in the community who like just did not want to help the homeless people that were homeless, I would basically like have this kind of like chain of thought of like our thought experiment of basically saying like, really think about it. Like, what would it take for you? And I don't mean to be like, mean about it, but like, what would it take for you to defecate in front of a store? Like you are not in a healthy position if you're going to be doing that. And no matter how angry the person had been, the compassion light bulb immediately went off. And that's when you can make the connection to chronic homelessness is about mental illness. It's about severe substance abuse. It's about developmental issues. And there was an opening to then engage them on that new strategy. We had to have the strategy, but like, that was like the key that I always used to. And so like, again, 9 out of 10 times that worked. And it was listening to people, no matter how angry they were, what they had to say, and then having an actual strategy that responded to the concerns that they were having. I think, and not quoting like, housing statistics or whatever, like, but really like, I hear your problem. This is what's causing the problem. And this is how we're going to solve it. And that seemed to work a lot of the time.
Agree. Thank you.
Some really good ideas. I know Marion has been wanting, we just have a few minutes left, so I wanted to get to Marion and Jerry, but also Karen, I'm really sorry I haven't called you like I promised I would a month ago. And I wanted to know first if you had any comment or wanted to ask a question.
No worries. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so timelines are a little skewed. Don't worry. I'm not taking it personally. I don't have any questions. I work really closely with Andrew and Marin, so I see him frequently. This is another opportunity to see him. We'll see him again tomorrow. But the one thing I can say is to be a part of the collaboration in Marin has been really powerful. Yeah. And like Andrew mentioned, there was a lot of the same contentions that we're seeing. I mean, I straddle both communities. So I do see Sonoma sitting where Marin was probably 5 years ago, which feels weighted and like there's a challenge before us. But the cool thing is I also see the other side of that in Marin. So I know it's about all of us just coming to the table and breaking through those barriers of like whatever's going on. It's some of it's similar, some of it's different, but I'm certainly hopeful. So I appreciate Andrew coming in and sharing all of his expertise. He really is able to articulate our process in such a concise way that it's like, just do part A, then do part B. So it's very helpful.
Thank you, Karen.
One more
Marion.
question. I wonder, is it possible to, maybe he can send an email or something to explain more clearly what the HOT program is, and also particularly by by name list. in a email communication. That would be helpful.
Yeah, and we can cover that as well at one of the homeless action updates on a Monday, Grace.
Yes, and also I just want to mention, I would invite any of you to write me blogs.
Yes,
I'm open to that.
Content. She needs content. Marion.
Just briefly, I think.
Oh, sorry,
I
Andrew.
was just going to add
Grace,
to the
just
HOT
let you know,
program.
I'm only a concerned citizen as well. You and I are in a similar boat. I don't get paid for anything I do regarding homelessness. So it's frustration that I have, because if I was the corporation involved in this, I would be sitting grabbing the government by the neck and saying, come on now. But I feel like we've really wasted $11 million in the past, this past year on very few people. And it wasn't us that did that. It was really the county of Sonoma that did that. With Los Guilicos and Finley, a tremendous amount of money, because there really wasn't any attempt to have a community and organizational and strategic plan around trying to address the homeless situation that we have in Sonoma County. It was the county kind of trying to get rid of the problem because they've been sweeping it, ongoing sweeping. And really, you've got a lot of concerned citizens in Sonoma County, more than in Marin County, because I lived in Marin County for 19 years. I know what Homeward Bound went through. I know the NIMBYism was much stronger in Marin County. And then I come to this county and I see compassionate people, but we're not getting enough done. And so it's very frustrating. And Jerry, you're saying just do it. Well, okay, so here we are. What can we just do? You have the names of these people. So how do we move forward and we need to have the backing of Barbie Robinson or Tina Rivera or Michael Gauss or Chuck Wotern. I mean, we have to have those people behind us. They're sitting at the table next to us.
Jerry.
So a couple things. First, for Jenna, you'd be surprised. There's not a lot of stuff that people have to sign. There's a lot of paperwork and stuff, but it's really incredible. They just sign that IMDT, which is the interagency multidisciplinary release of information that allows 30 different agencies to talk to each other. I've given that to many, many people in the course of my work. Not a single one has questioned initialing these boxes that give away a bunch of rights. And so literally Janet and Jules being in the middle of where you are in a really good place, because both of you have wisdom, both of you have knowledge, and both of you have access. So keep working, doing the work that you're doing. And Marion, talk to David Rabbit. Each of us has to talk to our own member of the Board of Supervisors. Next week is the vote. Next week, we're going to have a new continuum of care board. So if we spent the next 6 months fixing this thing in some way, and it's mostly by listening. I don't think I have all the answers. We have to listen and do the sort of engagement that Andrew talks about. But I know we have all of those components, particularly Petaluma. Has taken such a leadership role for so many years. Mm-hmm. So let's do it. I mean, it's like, no, there's no easy answer. Accountability about spending the money. 2.5, 3 weeks ago now, on a Monday, the 10th of November, the Board of Supervisors authorized something between $6 and $11 million. I'm not even sure. They did this special session. If you go back and look at the video of that session, neither did the staff explain how they're going to spend the $6 million, nor did any member of the Board of Supervisors ask any questions, except for their most recent little, what about the camp at the north end of township? So, but guess what? Whoever writes the agenda or writes the minutes wins. So we can form the agendas, or we can call, watch the minutes. And that's how you get things done, by paying attention, and then by trusting the people who are doing things.
So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things because Andrew is the proud father of a young child and I'm sure has like a full evening ahead of him. First of all, I wanted to thank everybody for this very frank discussion, and I will let you know that generally we post these recordings on my YouTube channel. If anybody feels sensitive about that, please email me because we had some very, I know you know, you have these conversations 8 times a day, but number one, this depth of conversation helps other COCs, which is why I don't mind posting it. For one thing, but again, if you feel like it was too sensitive, please, please feel free to let me know. I had a million questions, Andrew. They were all around project management, things that I'm going to hold for the next time. And I did want to just let everyone know that, to Jerry's point, Homeless Action is sponsoring a Continuum of Care candidate forum on this Sunday at 2 o'clock. I think it's 2 o'clock, right? And if anyone needs that information, there, I mean, it's open to whomever wants to hear. But Homeless Action, like we all have a very limited email list. So if you're not on that email list and know that's happening, let me know and I'll get that to you. And then 2 other events I'd like to just remind everybody about that you could take into your networks. One is St. Joseph's Hospital is doing a pretty comprehensive webinar series on mental health and suicide. And so tomorrow is a presentation at 4 o'clock. If anybody wants that, I'll email you that. And finally, in December, we're going to do one more presentation with a gentleman named Matt Simmons, who's a nationally noted point-in-time count expert. And the goal of that presentation is to talk about a community level understanding of the PIT count. Oftentimes, I know that these jurisdictions love to hang their hat on we've reduced homelessness by this much percent or this much percent. There's a lot of science and methodology that goes into the PIT count process. So Matt's going to talk about that for the average person to understand really the complexity and where HUD might be changing its, the way that they say, well, definitely they're changing their methodology next year because of COVID, but going forward, we're thinking that there is there's a better way to do the PIT count without involving, that would be more accurate, and that involves getting everybody into the HMIS at some point. So everybody is on you're on my email list. And again, if you have any concerns about us posting this on YouTube, please let me know. And Andrew, I cannot thank you enough for this level of detail. And when he and I were talking, I said, I'm curious, I want to know your spark points. I want to know your tipping points for, we all do by name lists. What made yours work better? And I think, that level, and then just some of these tips and tricks about, kind of sparking collaboration in a different way. I think those were just enormously valuable, just enormously. I too feel like if the general public and folks like the CAN folks, as well as if you're in an advocacy group for homelessness, if you understand really what the blockers are to service success, just from an educational perspective, I think a lot of that fervor goes away. So I'm really committed to that, and we're really committed to that, and that's why we're going to keep going with these conversations. So thank you so much, everybody. Karen, I owe you, and I will definitely find you in December. We've had a great night. Thanks so much. And again, if you have concerns about posting this, please just let me know, and we'll figure that out. And thank you again, everybody, for spending your night with us.
Thanks, Teddy.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
later.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Andrew.
so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.